Hi, thank you very much. Sorry for being late. I had a previous appointment before. So my presentation is about how CA systems may bring opportunities for mechanization, which I'd like to call appropriate mechanization. So I'm Frederick Baudron. I'm an agronomist with CIMIT based in Ethiopia. David Kahan, my colleague, also agribusiness here, will contribute to some of the questions on agribusiness, and I know there will be. So let me start by saying that probably farm power is a sort of forgotten resource in sub-Saharan Africa when we talk of sustainable intensification. Lots of work on germplasm, lots of work on fertilizer, nutrients, lots of work on water, but what about power? And if we really look at it, I mean, we have increasing labor shortages in sub-Saharan Africa. Don't believe people who say that really the opportunity cost of labor is close to zero in sub-Saharan Africa. This is maybe true in average, but there is definitely some peak labors. So yes, things that we know, rural urban migration, HIV and AIDS, aging population. So labor is really becoming a bit of a problem. And in many areas, not everywhere of course, but animal traction might not be the solution. It is in some areas for sure, but we can see, for example, in the Ethiopian highlands, there is really big problem of biomass shortages. So you have to produce quite a lot of biomass to feed a pair of oxen that you're going to use maybe a week for plowing and a week for threshing. Well, droughts, remember what happened in Tanzania. Diseases, even Zambia, I think, is still trying to recover from those diseases from the 90s. So maybe we should look also at an alternative to animal traction. And of course, the fact that, well, we have more and more problems of labor, of animal traction, means very high labor drudgery. And this labor drudgery is placed mainly on women. So big gender implication with also an agriculture which is increasingly practiced by women. And of course, it makes also agriculture less and less attractive to the youth. I mean, the generation of today doesn't want to follow oxen or dig those huge basins that Trent showed us. You need to make it more attractive. And so that's a sort of research question that we have, and many evidence to show that maybe farm power might be a major limiting factor to productivity in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think CA, at least to me, I'm not speaking in the name of CIMIT, but I would say it's first and foremost an energy-saving technology. And if you look where CA has been adopted, well, mainly South America, North America, Australia, New Zealand. The major incentive there was reduction of fuel and machinery costs. And even in less mechanized systems of the developing countries, I do believe that timeliness and early planting, so being able to plant early and to start a crop early, is a major and probably the first incentive of CA if you look at adoption in the world. So to me, and this is I'm not speaking in the name of CIMIT, but I think the primary purpose of CA is really to establish a crop with as little energy as possible. And then, well, other benefits are definitely bonuses, and they are important. But I think that's the key, really, the entry point to adoption of CA, I would say. And actually, when you remove soil inversion, which is by far the most intensive power operation, you really open a range of opportunities, a range of possibilities. I mean, if you just use those simple discs as shown on these pictures, and you don't have to drive a moldboard and invert your soil, you don't need a lot of horsepower, really. And this makes possible the use of lower powered, more affordable, very easy to maintain small tractors like this, for example, 15 horsepower two-wheel tractor. So you see even the steering mechanism is just 2 cables, easy to maintain. About $1,000 in China, if not less. In Ethiopia right now, $1,350. So something fairly cheap, just 15 horsepower, but probably enough when it comes to direct seeding and not plowing the soil. And the good news is that we have a lot of options commercially available that have been generated fairly recently from emerging economies such as Brazil, India, China. So, well, one set of technology on your left would be like strip tillage, so using basically a rotavator at the back and having a box on top of it, so you just rotovate narrow strips and you place fertilizer and seeds in those strips. Otherwise, you can just basically pool direct seeders. 2 rows is probably the best you can do. 15 horsepower is not much. You can go up to 4 rows if you have a very soft soil. But there's a lot of 2-row direct seeders and even more simple 1-row direct seeders. So those are commercially available. We're not talking of technology under development. You can buy them whenever you want, basically. And well, this is some small data from Ethiopia, from Awassa in the south. So you can see from conventional planting, the bar in gray, you basically halve the time necessary to plant compared to conventional planting with whatever planter from those 6 planters I showed. And if you even include the time necessary for conventional land preparation, so all the plowing and all this, you might divide by 8 actually the time required. So you can really actually improve your timeliness there. And with, well, of course, this is fossil fuel, and probably I will have questions about that, but with a minimum consumption of fuel, 5 to 10 liters. More consumption if you have more rows to plant, of course, and if you use the strip tillage because you have this rotavator at the back, but as low as 5 liters. Not that much if we think about it, and especially if we think of the gain of productivity you might have with that. So there's always trade-offs. And well, yield advantage, not always. Especially for maize and those kind of crops, we mainly have savings in terms of time and in terms of energy necessary to establish a crop, as I was mentioning. But for small grain, so you can see on the left pictures with wheat. So the wheat at emergence, you can see the residue of maize previously, and below, just before harvest, you can see a fairly nice crop. And with small grain, yes, we see a gain in yield because we plant in row. It's not broadcasted, so increased precision. You band your fertilizer also right below the seed where it's most useful. So you see really nice gain of productivity. And on the right, even with teff, and teff, I don't know if you all know teff, but it's well known for actually to necessitate many plowing operation, 6, 7, 8. So this teff was planted just with a single pass, and you can see below the quite nice crop with about 2.5 ton of teff per hectare, just with a single pass. So I think it's quite interesting when we talk of small grain. Well, so we have a lot of commercially available seeders, but no true best bet, I would say, for sub-Saharan Africa. Most of them were developed in South Asia, in former paddy field. So we have some biophysical and socioeconomic specificity in sub-Saharan Africa that makes it difficult to say that we have really the perfect seeder for sub-Saharan Africa. So some example. If you plant on a soil which is not irrigated, of course, you have dry, hard soils, very often stony. If you think about Bangladesh, for example, where some nice planters have been developed, well, this is basically a delta, so I dare for you to find a stone there, but a lot of the stones in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the fields, are very stony, so you can break some blades, like on the picture. It was in Kenya. The fields are also very uneven. You know, former paddy fields are generally like very flat, but when they are uneven, you need actually your seeders to be able to follow the ground. The weed load also is quite impressive. Sometimes you have like nice biomass, so you need like proper technology to get to be able to manage this weed load. And also some socioeconomic specificity. Like if you look at this Fitarelli planter. Well, of course, I don't know how it was developed, but like in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, you need to move from one farm to the next, or the distance between the homestead and the field might be great, so you need transport. I don't know how to transport this Fitarelli. I think it was developed for really a farmer to use it on his backyard. And diversity of crops. I think diversity is also a characteristic of family agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa. So you need something that can handle small seed, big seeds, and so forth, and not only large seeds. And of course, like constraint in resources, you cannot have a planter that costs $4,000. I think like $800 or so, $900 is probably the threshold. So we have been working with this project, FACASI, funded by Australia, on developing some locally made toolbar-based seeders. So this one can basically handle most of the challenges I mentioned, and it costs about $800 manufactured in Tanzania or Kenya. So we can work on improving those best bet commercially available. We can also develop, and I think that's really a way we need to invest in toolbar-based seeders. And I would argue that this small mechanization can be considered appropriate mechanization in most of sub-Saharan Africa. Appropriate in the sense that we have minimum negative social impact. I mean, we don't need to consolidate. We often hear mechanization means consolidation for efficiency and so forth. But in that case, well, those small tractors are very efficient in very small and fragmented fields. Equitable access, from what we can see in, for example, in Bangladesh. everybody can get access to this kind of tractors because they require very low capital, and the service also means it's. I've shown like 5 to 10 liters of diesel, so it means like the service even would be cheap, and no displacement of labor. I mean, we are not talking of the ladder of mechanization as we heard in the past, but really mechanizing only the most power-intensive operation. There's still room for manual labor, still room for also animal traction, of course, in this approach. And also probably a minimum negative environmental impact, low soil degradation, so low footprint from these machines. They are very, very light. And also the fact that they are, yes, powerful enough for conservation agriculture, but not powerful enough for plowing. So it means in terms of soil degradation, we are minimizing it definitely. And yes, if we retain those small fragmented fields, if we retain trees and so forth, because we can go around all these structures, it's probably good also for biodiversity. But appropriate mechanization, well, we heard that before in the 70s and 80s, and it largely failed. So why did it fail? Very few of these machines made it to the market, and that's where we are investing a lot of energy and time in business. And that's my colleague, David Kahan, who can talk better than me about it. But basically, we are trying to commercialize this small mechanization to resource-constrained farmers, which is obviously challenging. It sounds already like something challenging. So first of all, I think one of the principles is really to use private rural service providers. We know that only few farmers in sub-Saharan Africa will be able to purchase those tractors. And the early analysis of David and his colleagues shows that anyway, it's not really profitable for farmers to own machines unless they provide services as well. So service providers is really the way to go, we think. Multi-purpose use. Also, most of the agriculture is not irrigated. We have only one season in most agroecologies, so it means like we need to maximize the use rate of mechanization. We need multi-purpose use. So I mean for other things like post-harvest, for transport and so forth. I'll talk about it later. And of course, also linking probably the input business model, like mechanization, to the output business model. We need cash actually to pay for mechanization services or for the machines themselves. So we need to work also with cash crops. So we work for CMITs, maize and wheat, but we also try to work a lot in agroecologies where there is cash crop to pay for those services. Bundling of services and product, of course, to reduce the cost of mechanization services is one principle. And finally, of course, there might be the need for a possible broker. It can be an NGO, it can be a project. But often when you have a weak market, as in most of sub-Saharan Africa, you need a broker, basically. So I was talking about multi-purpose use of two-wheel tractor. We know that there is high demand for mechanization, even at low labor wage, for tasks like transport. It's a fact. And it's often like the first use of any engine is for transport, transporting everything from input, output, people, livestock, whatever. And also those power-intensive operations that require little human control, like shelling, all these post-harvest operations where basically you just have to hit the crop, are easy to mechanize, even at low labor wage. And even those operations that are not profitable if they're not mechanized, like lifting water. So those are probably even the entry point, even maybe before mechanizing CA. But I think we cannot like just talk about mechanizing CA without mechanizing those tasks that are really where there's a high demand for mechanization. So it means we're talking of a farm mechanization approach and not only mechanizing CA. And of course, when you look, for example, this is data from North Tanzania, and you can see where the peaks are. It's not only at sowing or planting, it's also weeding, it's also harvesting, it's also transporting. So even the demand in terms of drudgery from our target group is also for other tasks than just establishing a crop. So there is several models in terms of business models. So that's a sort of decision-making trees that we came up with my colleague David. So depending on who leads the business model, depending on the ownership of the machines, so different models. So we came up with 9 classes at the bottom. So just to show them to you, but not to spend too much time on it. So you can have some ownership by group, individual ownership, contract farming, dealer-led or manufacturer-led. And you can see like there's the countries also where we are starting to experiment those different business models, so different approaches. And maybe almost to conclude is to say, okay, I mentioned appropriate mechanization, appropriate scale mechanization that failed in the 70s and 80s. I mean, few of these machines made it, if any, to the market. So why should it work this time? And I would say, first of all, I think Africa has changed tremendously, agriculture in Africa. I mean, the demand is really there. We can see that intensification is there. The commercial orientation also of agriculture has really increased a lot in Africa. The value of agriculture has increased a lot in the past 10, 15 years. And also we see now there's a lot of supporting infrastructure. You see those small three-wheelers, Bajaj, motorbikes everywhere. So if somebody can repair such a simple engine, they can also repair the simple engine, one cylinder of a two-wheel tractor. So we have more infrastructure, infrastructure for fuel, for repair, for all this. And finally, there was a lot of probably past focus on public sector focus. We need really to involve the private sector. And that's what I was trying to mention with this approach with commercialization and business model development. But finally, with the project we are currently involved in, we are trying to do almost everything at once. So that's my last slide is to say, like, if there was any new project, we need to make sure that we do that in a stepwise approach, starting probably by really identifying clearly what tasks needs to be mechanized based on their low labor productivity and their drudgery, but also the likely demand, because drudgery alone doesn't mean that there will be a demand and capacity to pay for it. Then identifying also suitable machine, and if they are not suitable, as I try to demonstrate, maybe manufacturing them locally, and only then try to create the demand. The demand is very low in most of sub-Saharan Africa. People don't know that you can use a two-wheel tractor to seed directly, for example. Even the knowledge of two-wheel tractors is quite limited. But once you create the demand, you can see that people really want to use them. So we need to invest a lot of resources on that, creating demand probably, before trying to build capacity skills for mechanization and building those business models. And probably early business models should be like with machines owned by farmers at an early stage, and then when the business become more profitable, entrepreneurs specialized in hiring services can come later. That's also something coming from the agribusiness analysis. And finally, linking to finance, we are mentioning finance, that's really the key. But once all these steps have been fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Fred? Yes, Joseph.
Yes, thanks, Fred. Very good presentation, really. Again, I would like to, all of us to maybe, this is now 2014 or 15 now. I think 10 years ago that you would not have been able to show all these slides with these different seeders for two-wheel tractors. 10 years ago, we had basically the moulboard plow for animal tractor and the disc plow for tractors. So things are changing. I mean, if you look, put this in a time scale, and we all know that in Brazil, CA has taken from the early 70s to now. I mean, the uptake of it. I think what is happening right now on the ground in upscaling it is really quite impressive, and maybe also what Frederic presented is this difference between the agronomic principles that seems to be so rigid and the issue of upscaling where mechanization has to kick in, basically. Still trying to keep the good agronomic practices, but also look at the business models, because when mechanization kicks in, you need to get commercial. Mechanization without commercialization is not possible, just as a... So I think your stepwise approach in the end was a good slide, really, for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. First Steve and then...
I think one thing I'd like to re-emphasise from Fred's presentation, and something that Trent made and something that Stephen made, is to be really aware of conflicting messages. I work in Ethiopia. I know the work that Fred's done, and I'm hoping he's going to be doing some of it for us in Uganda in the future. But in an area of Ethiopia where I'm working, we're promoting conservation agriculture and reduced tillage. At the same time, the ministry has just taken receipt of 500 90 horsepower tractors. Similar thing is happening in Kenya. Huge government promotion of conservation agriculture. At the same time, a country that is supposed to be a leader in conservation agriculture is donating 1,500 60 horsepower tractors to Kenya. So we actually have conflicting messages. We have conflicting messages on monocropping, and we see this not only within government circles, but also, I'm afraid to say, within IFAD projects as well. And it's something we need to take on board to actually understand these conflicts, particularly when we come to doing the design and subsequent promotion and supervision.
Brent.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I totally agree with the policy coherence issue you just raised. You face it a lot over. Fred, I used to work with Africa Rice, and 17 years ago to 15 years ago, we were doing the same thing. The two-wheel tractors were first introduced into rice culture systems, and you typically found them for paddling, petting the fields and other things. We had adopted a thresher cleaner from Erie, and used basically the same approach you were. We went to local blacksmiths and others, and with the basic design that was scalable based on system demands. It could be small, it could be large. It was designed also so you could remove the engine block from the two-wheel tractors and use that to run the thresher cleaners in addition to pumping. So you began to develop a lot of scale-appropriate tools that could be run off the same motor plant, which tends to be the most expensive thing. And the reason I bring this up is your targeting of local forge-your-own blacksmiths, people in the private sector is absolutely appropriate, because it begins to become embedded in their business model, and they are your best spokespersons for not only promoting the tools but also ensuring that the maintenance support services are still available. So keep at it, you'll get somewhere.
Okay, I think talking about keeping at it, we're going to keep moving forward, and I guess I should let you have one question, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
It's not a question. I think it's an important point to take into account, and that is which we haven't mentioned earlier on, and that is the time frame we're talking about. Because our experience is that we're trying to do a hell of a lot within a very short time frame of a project. We're trying to bring in two-wheel tractors into Africa, southern and eastern Africa. We're trying also to deal with conservation agriculture. And one has to recognize that the experience from South Asia has been that two-wheel tractors came in a general sense, and it took them 7 years before they began to think of moving into conservation agriculture. So the risk over here is that we're dealing with big issues parallel, and we have to put it into a context that makes sense. So the conservation agriculture, in fact, our findings are showing that the entry point may not necessarily be the conservation agriculture because of the available time for these operations may not be so profitable. But the profitability comes from the transportation, maybe the water lifting, the post-harvest activities. So that aspect, I think, needs to be flagged.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely be talking about that more in the afternoon session, I'm quite sure.